Hey everyone, my name is Ethan Riley. I'm a senior Division I pole vaulter at Florida International University, and I am studying sport and exercise science. And today I'm going to be giving you a deadlift analysis. So first of all, we need to know, why do we do it, and what is its purpose for improving sport performance, more specifically in the general preparation phase. So first, we need to look at building a strong foundation. So to be able to do movements, explosive movements like the power clean, the clean and jerk, the back squat, we need to have a strong foundation of strength in order to keep our risk of injury as low as possible. And then secondly, the deadlift specifically is a very big focus on the transfer of energy from the floor through our ankles, through our knees, hips, and the trunk. And so this requires a lot of strength and stability in the four core muscles, those being the diaphragm, the transverse abdominis, the multifidus in our back, and then our pelvic floor. And so teaching our athletes how to correctly transfer this energy through the kinetic chain by proper technique and proper bracing significantly lowers the risk of injury as well as improves our sport performance. So now we're going to look at a video of what I consider perfect deadlift technique, and I'm just going to talk you through what we're looking for. Alrighty, for the setup, as you can see, this athlete starts with their feet at hip width and their shins about an inch from the bar. Here, from the athlete's perspective, they should see that the bar crosses right in the middle of their feet, almost like it's going to cut them in half. And in order for the knees to follow the toes, you can see that the athlete's feet are slightly externally rotated, which is really good here. You can see that the coach is telling his athlete to use an overhand grip whenever possible. This is for your more explosive movements down the road whenever you start doing your cleans and your Olympic lifts. An overhand grip will allow you to perform the catch, which for the deadlift you don't need. So if you are going to be pulling a lot of weight for your deadlift, you would want to use a mixed grip. But for now, since we're not performing any catch, we're going to stick with the overhand grip. And for bracing, some cues that you might want to use with your athletes is to have them imagine that they are pulling their rib cage down, their belly button to their spine, and to pinch a penny or a pellet, some sort of small object between their glutes. And now for the final part of our setup, we're going to be looking at the relationship between the knees and the hips. So what we want to see here is that our athletes' knees are directly above the center of their feet, and that their hips are slightly above their knees. This is going to add tension to the proximal hamstrings, which in the general population and within athletics is a problem area for injury, and so adding that tension is going to build our resilience to injury and help strengthen that part of the muscle. And finally, we get to talk about lifting the weight. So, as the athlete begins to pull, we want to make sure that they are contracting the hip extensors, the glutes, and their knee extensors, the quads, at the exact same time. This is going to make sure that our force output is directly vertical, which is exactly what we want. And finally, at the top of the movement, we want to see thoracic extension, aka a big chest, but we want to make sure that our athletes are not rounding their low back to do so. And finally, we need to get the weight back onto the ground, and to make sure that we are doing so safely, we are going to cue the athlete to push their hips back and allow their knees to bend naturally. Now that we have seen and talked about how to correctly perform the deadlift, I'm going to get vulnerable and we are going to analyze some of my reps and talk about some common errors and how to address them. For my first rep, you can see here that the setup looks pretty good. You can't see from this angle, but you will have to take my word for it that my feet are at hip width and slightly externally rotated. My knees are directly in line with the middle of my feet, which is good. My hips are above my knees, again, that's good. I would like to see that the bar is a little closer to my shins, which would allow for a slightly more upright posture, but overall this setup looks pretty good, and I would rate it about an 8.5 out of 10. From here, you can see that my hip and knee extensors do start at the same time, which is really nice. However, it's a little hard to catch, but you can see that my knees almost fully extend by the time the bar is about halfway up my thighs. This is what we call a hitch, and this comes from being more quad dominant, which This feels easier for me, however, it puts excess tension on the proximal hamstrings and the spinal erectors that we do not want in the deadlift. However, if we did want to isolate the proximal hamstrings, we would do a lift like an RDL. And toward the end of this video, you will see that my professor, Dr. Watson, gives me the cue of slowing down the movement. This allows my body to feel what it's like to contract both of those extensor groups simultaneously. And with that, you want to practice it over and over again with lighter loads until you slowly build up weight and you can reproduce that simultaneous extension under heavier loads. And you'll see after he gave me this cue that my technique started to improve and I got more comfortable, and you can slowly see that hitch starting to disappear. Now, if you are someone who has never deadlifted before or are just starting to deadlift, there is a regression of this lift, a more simple version called the modified deadlift. This is still going to target the same muscles, those proximal hamstrings, your glutes, but it is going to place less tension on the hip flexors, which in the general population are most of the time tight. And so for the setup of this deadlift, it is going to be almost the same. However, instead of your feet being at hip width, we are going to move them out to slightly past shoulder width. But we are going to make sure that the feet are a little bit more externally rotated, which will allow our knees to still follow our toes just like before. Widening your feet at the beginning of this setup will allow you to sit a little bit deeper at the beginning of your deadlift, which will mitigate some of the limitations of the range of motion in your ankles, specifically dorsiflexion, which is caused by tight calves. And now for the modified deadlift, the technical cues are still going to be the same. We want our knees directly above the middle of our feet and our hips slightly above our knees. And prior to the lift, we want to make sure that we are still bracing. Remember those cues of bringing the rib cage down, the belly button to the spine, and pinch a penny between your glutes. Like I said before, the modified deadlift is still going to hit those same muscle groups that we want to target with the deadlift. However, with widening our base, we're going to eliminate some of the limitations in the range of motion of the ankle and allow us to perform the deadlift as safe as possible. And so there you have it. Today we looked at the deadlift and how we use it to improve our sport performance as well as build resilience to injury. We saw how to perform the deadlift correctly and safely. We looked at some of my videos and saw some of the common errors, and I gave you guys some cues on how to fix those errors. And finally, we saw a modification for those of you who may be just starting to deadlift or just want to do so with less tension on those hip flexors. Hopefully you all enjoyed this video and possibly learned something. Next video, I'm going to be doing the same sort of analysis on the split jerk. So stay tuned for that, and hopefully I will see you guys in the next one.